one of the most famous epic narratives isn't just a story? What if it's actually a profound historical turning point? One with echoes that, well, you could argue still shape our world today. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the Kurukshetra War, as depicted in the ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata.
Right. And our mission here really is to challenge that common modern academic view, the one that tends to classify this conflict only as mythology.
Just a story.
Just a story, exactly. Instead, we're going to explore how traditional Hindu perspectives, when you combine them with some, well, frankly, surprising evidence.
Like what kind of evidence?
Well, archaeological finds, inscriptions, astronomical data, even genetic research. How all this builds a really multifaceted argument, an argument for its historicity and its lasting impact.
Okay, so we've got a lot to unpack. We're talking traditional texts, digs, star charts, DNA. Should be interesting. You might find some connections here pretty compelling. So let's start unpacking this. Where do we begin? Maybe with how foundational this idea is within Hinduism itself. That the Kurukshetra War was a real event.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, the Mahabharata isn't just called a poem, is it? It's designated as itihas.
That's right. Itihas.
It
It literally means thus occurred. It's a profound, ancient, scholarly term. It's not just flavor text. It inherently marks the Mahabharata as something that genuinely happened, not just fiction.
Thus occurred. That's a strong statement.
It's crucial. It's more than just a classification. It's an epistemological stance from within the tradition itself. It's saying, we understand these events as having truly taken place. It acts as a kind of moral and historical anchor.
Okay.
And it's central to traditions like Vaishnavism. It's in the Purana literature. It embodied these really deep struggles, power, righteousness. These themes still resonate today, don't they? Those deeper internal conflicts, leadership challenges.
They absolutely do. That idea of itihas, framing it as history, is powerful. But, for a lot of people, just the textual tradition isn't quite enough. They need something tangible.
Understandable.
So what happens when we actually start looking at the ground, the archaeology?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. The traditional battlefield itself, Kurukshetra, in modern-day Haryana, excavations there have turned up some significant finds.
Like what?
Iron arrows, spearheads, things you'd expect from a battle. And the dating, using thermoluminescence, puts them around 2800 BCE.
2800 BCE. Okay, how does that fit?
It aligns with some of the proposed dates for the war. It's not definitive for everyone, but it's a match.
And it's not just Kurukshetra, right?
No, not at all. Across North India, archaeologists have identified over 35 ancient cities mentioned in the Mahabharata narratives.
35? Wow. Any famous examples?
Sure. Places like Panaprastha, Sonaprastha, and even the site now called Puranakila in Delhi, which many identify as ancient Indraprastha, the Pandava capital.
And what ties these sites together?
What's remarkable is the cultural consistency you see in the artifacts. Copper utensils, iron tools, seals, gold and silver ornaments, terracotta discs, and particularly painted grayware pottery.
Painted grayware. That's a key marker, isn't it?
It is, for that period. Finding it consistently across these Mahabharata-related sites suggests a widespread and cohesive civilization that aligns with the epic's descriptions.
Okay, so artifacts on land are one thing, but the Mahabharata also describes incredible places, even cities lost to the sea.
Right, like Dwaraka.
Exactly. Lord Krishna's legendary city. What about the archaeology there?
This is arguably one of the most compelling finds. Marine archaeology off the coast of Gujarat, where Dwaraka was said to be. It's uncovered a submerged city.
Really? What did they find?
Massive fort walls, piers, wharves, a jetty. Structures that match the detailed descriptions in the Mahabharata remarkably well. Descriptions of its sophisticated construction and, crucially, its eventual submergence.
So the underwater evidence lines up with the text.
It does seem to. Dr. S.R. Rao, who was a pioneer in marine archaeology in India, he was quite explicit about it.
What did he say?
He stated, and I'm quoting here, that Dwaraka's discovery has set to rest the doubts expressed by historians about the historicity of Mahabharata and the very existence of Dwaraka city. He saw it as bridging that gap from the Vedic age right up to now.
That's a bold claim, set to rest the doubts. But is that universally accepted now, or are there still debates?
That's a fair question. The discovery of an ancient submerged city there is widely accepted, yes, but linking it unequivocally, for all academics, to the Mahabharata Dwaraka and therefore proving the epic's historicity. Well, there's still debate in some circles, particularly outside India.
Okay.
But within the Indian archaeological community, especially those who integrate textual traditions, it's seen as very strong supporting evidence. It has weight, even if it's not the single knockout proof for everyone. It's part of that cumulative picture.
Right, the multi-layered argument you mentioned. Okay, so we have aground, under the sea. What about written records, inscriptions?
Yes, that's another layer. Shrikota Venkatacham's research is key here. He identified 4 specific inscriptions that seem to support a war date around 3138 BCE.
3138 BCE again. That's close to the other dates. What do these inscriptions actually say?
They're quite specific. For example, there's a gift deed from Emperor Janamejaya.
Janamejaya, he was the great-grandson of Arjuna, right? A Kuru descendant.
Exactly, son of Parikshit. This deed is dated explicitly after the war in what's called Jaya of Udaya Yudhishthira Saka, year 89. That translates to 3012 BCE.
So a legal document referencing the war era.
Precisely. It shows the war timeline being used as a historical marker. There's another copper plate gift from him too. And centuries later, around 634 CE, an inscription on a Shiva temple wall in Karnataka made under King Pulakeshin II.
What does that one say?
It directly references the time elapsed since the Mahabharata War. It shows that the war was still a recognized historical benchmark, deep in cultural memory, over 3,500 years later by that count.
Wow, okay. So let's pull this thread together. We have the Itihas tradition classifying it as history. We have archaeological finds at Kurukshetra, these widespread city sites, the submerged Dwaraka, and now these inscriptions with specific dating references.
It builds a pretty robust case, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A multi-layered argument suggesting the epic isn't just a myth, but is rooted in some significant historical reality.
It certainly paints a compelling picture. So, if we accept this possibility, what was the conflict itself, according to the epic?
At its heart, it was a dynastic struggle.
Yeah.
It had 2 groups of cousins, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, both part of the Kuru royal family.
Fighting over the kingdom.
Fighting over the throne of Hastinapur, yes. It stemmed from deep political and family feuds. But the epic frames it on a much grander scale.
How so?
As a cataclysmic clash between dharma or righteousness, duty, cosmic order, and dharma, its opposite, unrighteousness. It wasn't just a war, it was a war for the soul of the era.
Okay, that sets the stage. But you mentioned dating, 2800 BCE through 138 BCE. Are these the only dates proposed? Because nailing down when this might have happened seems crucial.
It is crucial, and it's also where things get quite debated. Different researchers arrive at different dates using different methods.
Any standout research here?
Well, Nilesh Oak's work is certainly fascinating, and it offers a very specific, though quite different date.
Different how? Earlier.
Much earlier. Oak proposes 5561 BCE.
5561 BCE. That's thousands of years before the other dates we mentioned. How does he arrive at that?
His approach is intensely multidisciplinary. He pulls together astronomy, archaeology, genealogy from the texts, geology, oceanography, and the scriptures themselves, of course.
But what's the core method for that specific date?
It's the astronomy. Oak claims he meticulously deciphered over 300 specific astronomical observations described within the Mahabharata text itself.
300 clues. Like what?
Planetary positions, eclipses, specific lunar phases. He argues that on one particular date, October 16th, 5751 BCE, all 12 planets mentioned were in their stated positions.
All 12?
Yes, plus 2 Amavasyas, new moon days, 2 eclipses, a very rare lunar phase called a Kashaya Paksha, even a comet mentioned in the text.
That sounds incredibly precise.
He argues it's like a cosmic fingerprint. That specific configuration, he claims, is so unique it wouldn't repeat for literally billions of years. So if the descriptions are accurate, the date is fixed.
That's a powerful claim, using the sky as a timestamp.
It is, and it reflects this broader trend of applying very rigorous scientific methods to analyze ancient texts. Oak himself is quite critical of relying only on, say, linguistic or archaeological dating, arguing they're less precise when you have such detailed celestial records available in the text itself.
Okay, so whether it's 3000 BCE or 5500 BCE, we're talking about a potentially massive ancient conflict. If a war of that scale happened, what kind of mark would it leave? Maybe on humanity itself.
That's a profound question. And the answer might actually be visible in our genes.
In our DNA.
Through something called the Y-chromosome bottleneck theory.
Right, I've heard of this. It's about a reduction in male genetic diversity.
Exactly, a drastic reduction. It suggests periods in the past where the number of breeding males plummeted compared to females. Warfare is often cited as a primary cause.
And is there a specific bottleneck linked to this time frame?
There is. One of the most significant bottlenecks seems to have occurred around 7,000 years ago, so roughly 5000 BCE. Some call it the Mahabharata bottleneck.
Why that name?
Because during this period, estimates suggest the global effective male population shrank massively. The male-to-female breeding ratio might have dropped to an extreme, like 1 to 17.
One man for every 17 women, that's drastic.
It is, and Nyla Ashok, connecting back to his dating, hypothesizes that this specific gender-skewed event could be directly linked to the Mahabharata War.
He thinks the war caused this global genetic bottleneck.
He argues that such a massive, organized conflict, described as incredibly devastating in the texts, is the most plausible single-event explanation for such a large and selective population crash around that time, especially given how few other global explanations fit.
That's a huge claim, linking a specific war to a global genetic pattern. But thinking back to the critiques, didn't you mention the bottleneck seems global, not just Indian, and possibly linked to agriculture? How does the Mahabharata bottleneck idea square with that?
That's the critical counterpoint, absolutely. Oak's proponents would argue that while yes, the effects are seen globally in the data we have, the trigger could have been a catastrophic event concentrated in a major population center, like the Indian subcontinent during the war.
So like ripples spreading out.
Sort of. The argument is that while slower processes like agricultural shifts and related smaller conflicts might contribute over time, they don't fully explain the sheer suddenness and severity of the male-specific decline suggested by the data for that specific period. A massive, devastating war like the Mahabharata, they argue, provides a more direct potential cause for such a sharp gender-specific drop.
Okay, I see the reasoning. Even if it's debated, it hinges on the scale and impact of the war itself.
Precisely. And the scale described in the Mahabharata is staggering.
How staggering?
The text talks about 18 Akshohinis participating.
Akshohinis, what are those?
Think of them as massive army divisions. Each one, according to the text, consisted of tens of thousands of chariots, elephants, horses, and foot soldiers.
Tens of thousands per division.
Yes. The breakdown is 21,870 chariots, 21,870 elephants, 65,610 cavalry, and 108,350 infantry per Akshohini.
Okay, my math isn't great, but 18 of those.
Yeah.
That's enormous.
It is. If you tally it up, you're looking at roughly 3.3 million combatants on the field. Maybe up to 4 million if you include all the support personnel.
4 million people involved in a single war in antiquity.
That's what the epic describes. And it emphasizes near total annihilation. It famously lists the survivors, just 10 on the Pandava side, including Krishna, and only 3 on the Kaurava side.
10 plus 3 out of millions.
That's the narrative. Lord Meghnad Desai, a modern economist who studied this, estimated nearly 2 million actual deaths.
2 million deaths. Now, I can see why critics find that implausible. That figure sounds huge even for modern wars, let alone an ancient one. How could ancient societies possibly support or lose that many people?
And that's exactly where the criticism often comes from, usually based on, let's call it, a conventional, often Eurocentric view of historical timelines and population density. Meaning, if you assume human civilization is relatively young and populations were sparse until quite recently, then yes, 2 million casualties sounds impossible. You simply wouldn't have had that many people around, let alone organized into armies.
But the Hindu perspective offers a different timeline, doesn't it?
A radically different one. Remember the Yuga cycles, Satya, Treta, Dwapara, Kali? The Kurukshetra War is placed at the cusp of Dwapara and Kali Yuga.
Okay.
In this framework, we're not talking about the dawn of civilization. We're talking about a point potentially deep into a long cycle of ages. The text described preceding Yugas, Treta, and Satya as lasting hundreds of thousands, even millions of years, with highly advanced civilizations, flourishing kingdoms, and potentially vast populations.
So within that model, the world was already ancient and populous before the war.
Exactly. The idea that complex societies are only a few thousand years old directly contradicts this traditional view. If you accept the Yuga framework, then a world that has existed and developed complex societies for vast stretches of time could, theoretically, support much larger populations.
Making a massive war with millions involved. Maybe not plausible by our recent historical standards, but potentially feasible within that ancient context.
Precisely. A 2 million casualty figure, while still horrific, becomes demographically conceivable if you're talking about a clash between multiple large established kingdoms with organized, technologically capable armies within a world understood to be vastly older and more populated than conventional history often allows.
That Yuga concept really does shift the perspective, and you mentioned visualizing the decline, the bull of Dharma.
Yes, it's a powerful image. In Sati Yuga, the Golden Age, Dharma stands firm on four legs: austerity, cleanliness, compassion, and truth. In Trade Yuga, it loses one leg. In Dwapara Yuga, another.
And by Kali Yuga, the current age,
It stands precariously on just one leg, truth, though even that is diminished. It symbolizes this progressive decline in morality and righteousness through the ages, with Kurukshetra marking that critical transition point into the most challenging age.
Okay, let's loop back to genetics for a moment. We talked about the bottleneck. What about other genetic evidence? Maybe about the origins of people in India. Does it shed light on ancient migrations or population structures?
It does, and it often challenges some long-held theories, like the Indo-Aryan migration theory.
Which proposed?
Broadly, that groups of people migrated into India from the northwest, perhaps around 1500 BCE or earlier, bringing Indo-European languages, like Proto-Sanskrit, and possibly contributing to the later caste system.
Okay, a theory of external influence. But the sources we looked at suggest a counter-theory.
Yes, often termed the out-of-India theory, or at least emphasizing deep indigenous roots. And genetic studies, particularly of the Y-chromosome male lineage and mitochondrial DNA female lineage, provide some fascinating data points here.
What does the Y-chromosome data show?
Several studies suggest a predominantly South Asian origin for most Indian caste communities. They find less evidence for major recent influxes from outside, particularly from the north and west, than the classical migration theory might predict.
Any specific genetic markers?
The R1A1 haplogroup is often discussed. It's common in both Europe and South Asia, and often linked to Indo-European speakers.
Right.
But some genetic research suggests that R1A1, or at least key sub-branches like M17, might have actually originated in India or South Asia more broadly, and then diffused outwards. They find greater genetic diversity and age for this marker within India, particularly among Brahmin groups, than in Central Asia or Europe.
So the genetic flow might have been the other way around, from India outwards.
That's what this line of genetic evidence suggests, yes.
Yeah.
It flips the script on who migrated where. And looking at the maternal side, mitochondrial DNA studies indicate that less than 10% of the maternal lineages in Indian caste groups trace back to an ancestor outside South Asia within the last, say, 12,000 years.
12,000 years, that points to very deep indigenous roots for the vast majority of the female population.
Exactly. It reinforces the idea of a largely stable, long-term population within the subcontinent, arguing against large-scale recent replacements or migrations, at least on the maternal side.
So, to put it simply, while the Indo-Aryan migration theory is still debated and has its own lines of evidence, these genetic studies strongly emphasize long-standing indigenous roots and potentially challenge the idea of major external groups bringing key cultural or linguistic elements into India relatively recently.
Precisely. They offer a compelling genetic argument that complicates, and in some views refutes, the simpler migration models, suggesting a much deeper, older, and more internally developed history within South Asia.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. We've talked history, archaeology, genetics, but the Kurukshetra War is profoundly spiritual in significance too, isn't it? You mentioned the Yuga transition.
Absolutely central. It's seen as this Yuga Sandhi.
Sandhi meaning junction, twilight.
Junction, twilight, transition point, exactly. That critical moment between the end of Dwapara Yuga and the beginning of Kali Yuga.
The dawn of the current age.
Yes. And as we discussed, in Hindu cyclical cosmology, the four yugas see this progressive decline in dharma, in righteousness. The traditional Puranic dating, as we noted, puts this transition right around 3102 BCD, specifically marked by Lord Krishna's departure from the earthly realm shortly after the war.
And the war itself is seen as part of this transition.
Very much so. It's understood not just as a human conflict, but as a divinely orchestrated event necessary to sort of clear the slate, to reestablish a semblance of righteousness, even if diminished, for the coming Kali Yuga.
A cosmic reset, almost.
In a way, Krishna's direct involvement underscores this. It's about restoring cosmic balance. The immense suffering from this perspective was a kind of necessary, albeit tragic, cleansing process to usher in the new, darker age.
And the battlefield itself, Kurukshetra, it has a special name, doesn't it?
Namakshitra, the field of righteousness. It's considered sacred ground precisely because this cosmic drama unfolded there.
And it's the setting for
The Bhagavad Gita. perhaps the most famous part of the Mahabharata, that profound philosophical discourse between Lord Krishna and the warrior Arjuna right before the battle commences.
Where Arjuna has his crisis of conscience about fighting his own kin.
Exactly. And Krishna's teachings to him about duty, dharma, selfless action, karma yoga, detachment from results, the nature of the soul, devotion, bhakti, these form the core of the Gita.
Timeless insights, really, making it a cornerstone of Hindu philosophy.
Absolutely. The Gita itself, born from the crucible of Kurukshetra, symbolizes that internal moral struggle we all face, the battle between right and wrong within ourselves.
Now, you mentioned the traditional dating for Kali Yuga starting around 3102 BCE. But are there other interpretations? Because I know some contemporary figures have different views on these Yuga timelines.
Yes, that's a really interesting area. While the Puranic timeline is dominant, there are alternative models.
Like Sadhguru's interpretation, it offers a quite different picture, doesn't it?
It does. Sadhguru, for instance, proposes a Yuga cycle based not on the vast Puranic timescales, but on the astronomical phenomenon of the precession of the equinoxes.
Precession. That's the slow wobble of the Earth's axis.
Exactly. It's a roughly 25,920-year cycle. Sadhguru links the full 4-Yuga cycle, ascending and descending, to this precession. In his model, a complete cycle of Sakya, Treta, Dwapara, and Kali Yugas takes 12,960 years, half the precession. This makes each yuga much shorter than the traditional lengths.
Okay, so shorter yugas based on an observable astronomical cycle. How does that change the dating?
Significantly, in Sadhguru's calculation, the Kurukshetra War ended around 3140 BCE. Krishna's departure was indeed around 3102 BCE, marking Kali Yuga's start, perhaps 3 to 4 months after the war.
So far, that sounds somewhat similar.
But here's the key difference. According to this precessional model, Kali Yuga only lasted 1,296 years. And Dwapara Yuga, 2,592 years, and so on.
Wait, so if Kali Yuga started around 3100 BCE and only lasted about 1,300 years?
Then it would have ended centuries ago. And crucially, in Sadhguru's view, humanity is currently not in the depths of Kali Yuga, but has already passed through it and is now ascending through the Dwapara Yuga again.
We're in Dwapara Yuga now.
According to this model, yes. And it anticipates a transition into the higher Treta Yuga around the year 2082 AD.
That completely changes the outlook, doesn't it? Instead of a narrative of ongoing decline in Kali Yuga.
It suggests an upward movement of human consciousness, an ascending cycle. It's a much more optimistic spiritual trajectory for humanity right now, anticipating greater possibilities rather than continued degradation. It's a fascinating contrast to the traditional view.
A very different feel. Okay, regardless of the specific timeline, whether declining or ascending, the legacy of the Mahabharata itself in India is immense.
Undeniably, it's not just an ancient text. It's a living source of moral teachings, wisdom, ethical guidance, exploring duty, honor, loyalty, the consequences of actions.
And the Gita, as you said, is central to philosophy. Kurukshetra itself is still a major pilgrimage site.
Absolutely. You could almost call the Mahabharata a kind of foundational operating system or a living constitution for much of Indian society, even subconsciously.
How so?
Its characters, Yudhishthira for righteousness, Bhima for strength, Arjuna for skill and dilemma, Karna for tragedy and loyalty, Krishna for divine strategy, they become archetypes. Its complex situations and moral dilemmas provide frameworks for understanding everything from personal ethics to social dynamics to political strategy.
So it's constantly referenced.
Constantly. In modern literature, art, television serials, which are incredibly popular, festivals, even political leaders frequently draw parallels between current events and Mahabharata situations or characters. It demonstrates its continuous living relevance.
And thinking about the war's aftermath, did it lead to broader societal changes described in the texts or suggested by history?
Potentially, yes. Some scholars suggest the war, by consolidating power or perhaps weakening many smaller kingdoms, might have paved the way for a transition from numerous feuding principalities towards larger, more unified states later on. This kind of environment could have fostered the compilation and spread of large-scale epic poetry, like the Mahabharata itself.
A unifying event leading to a unifying narrative.
Possibly. And geographically, there seems to be a correlation with a shift in the focus of civilization. Before the rough time frame of the war, the Sarasvati River basin was a major center. Afterwards, the center of gravity seems to shift more towards the Ganga River basin. The war narrative might reflect or symbolize parts of that transition.
Interesting. Now, the influence isn't just within India, is it? The story traveled.
Oh, absolutely. Its influence spread dramatically across Southeast Asia. We're talking Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, Indonesia.
How did it manifest there?
It inspired major literary works in local languages and incredibly rich theatrical traditions. Shadow puppet plays, the wayang kulit, especially in Indonesia and Malaysia, are often based on Mahabharata stories. There's also live dance drama, like wayang wong in Java.
Can you give examples of specific adaptations?
Sure. In Malay, you have the Hikayat Perang Pandawa Jaya, the story of the Pandavas' victorious war. In Java, the Kakawin Paratayuda, the War of the Badas, is a hugely important classical poem, and the Arjuna Wiwaha, Arjuna's wedding, focuses on Arjuna's story.
And visually, too.
Definitely. You see stunning stone reliefs depicting Mahabharata scenes at iconic temple complexes like Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom in Cambodia. It shows just how deeply these narratives were integrated into the culture and religion of these kingdoms.
It's amazing how far it spread.
And perhaps one of the most compelling aspects is its enduring popularity even in places that are now predominantly Muslim, like Indonesia.
Right, you mentioned wayang kulit.
Yes. In Indonesia, particularly Java, the Hindu epics, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, are considered an integral part of the national cultural heritage, regardless of personal religion. References are everywhere in the Javanese language, on street signs named after characters, even in political commentary, where leaders might be compared to figures from the epic.
So it transcends religious boundaries.
Completely. It showcases the epic's incredible capacity to be adopted, and to foster a sense of shared cultural identity, even across diverse religious landscapes. It's a testament to the power of the story.
So let's try to wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
What's the core takeaway? If you had to summarize this deep dive.
I'd say the Kurukshetra War, when you look beyond the simple myth label, emerges as potentially a pivotal historical event. It's backed by, well, a surprisingly compelling convergence of evidence.
Evidence.
Like the textual tradition classifying it as itihas, thus occurred, like the archaeological finds at Kurukshetra, the other cities, and especially the suggestive discovery of submerged Dwaraka, like the inscriptions giving specific dates, like the attempts at precise astronomical dating, even if debated, and like those intriguing and potentially disruptive genetic insights about bottlenecks and population origins.
So history, but also profound spiritual meaning.
Absolutely. Its significance is that Yuga Sandhi, the transition between ages, is crucial. It gave us the Bhagavad Gita with its timeless wisdom, and its legacy continues. It acts as this cultural operating system, influencing art, society, politics, ethics, across thousands of years and vast geographical regions.
It really makes you think. When we peel back the layers of these incredibly ancient epics, what other events, ones we currently label as mythological, might actually have left a real undeniable imprint on our shared human story? Maybe their historical truth is just waiting for us to find new ways to uncover it, challenging how we think we know our past.
It certainly suggests our understanding of history is far from static. It's constantly evolving as we find new evidence and new ways to look at the old stories. A lot left to explore.